Monday was the patronal festival of our church, Saints Peter and Paul. The origins of this feast began in the dark, dank underground chamber of the Mamertine prison in Rome, overlooking the Forum. The Roman Empire used this dreadful prison to house enemies of the state before their execution. According to tradition, Peter and Paul were imprisoned there by the Emperor Nero during his persecution of the Christians in Rome in 64 AD. On June the 29th, Peter and Paul were taken from the Mamertine. These two vastly different but faithful followers of the crucified one bade each other farewell one last time in this world. Paul was led out of the eastern gate of Rome, and Peter was taken west to the Vatican hill. Peter was crucified in the circus of Nero, where the Vatican stands today. Then he was hurriedly buried in the earth of the cemetery, which was just outside the circus. Eventually, above his burial site, the vast Basilica Church of St. Peter's was built. Paul, because he was a Roman citizen, was allowed a rather more dignified death. He was beheaded. A Roman Christian called Lucina buried Paul in a small vineyard in her estate on the Via Appia. And above Paul's grave, the Basilica of St. Paul's was erected, as with St. Peter's, in the 4th century by the Emperor Constantine when he became a Christian. Those churches are wonderful works of art and architecture, but that isn't what matters in the end. They direct us beyond themselves and beyond the mortal remains of Peter and Paul to something eternal, to Christ, the living cornerstone of God's temple. If Jesus is securely embedded into our lives, then the Lord will be building us as living stones into his spiritual temple. I think what we can learn from Peter and Paul is to be faithful to Jesus through the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of our lives, just as they were. Awaiting his death in the Mamertine, Paul wrote this to his young disciple Timothy. As for me, my life has already been poured out as an offering to God. The time of my death is near, and now the prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness that the Lord will give me. We may not have to face persecution and death in the way that Peter and Paul did, but may we, like them, find joy and hope in the Lord in the midst of the storms of life, and faithfully follow him wherever he may lead us.